Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. This week on the show I have 4 new LitRPG reviews just for you folks at home. And it's going to include a check for a billion, Galactogon book number 3, which is the final book in that series. It'll be out on August the 30th. Zone of Alacria, the Dragon's Gate, the first book in that series called The Experimental Alchemist, book number 1. That'll actually be out on August the 31st. After that'll be Clear and Present Ranger, a Caverns and Creatures short story by the always hilarious Robert Brevin. And last but not least will be The Itemancer, book number 1. And that's a slightly older novel. I should review the author's newer series, knew the story recently, and happened to find this and decided to give it a go to let you know how it turns out. It's actually going to be a slightly shorter episode of the show just because I'm recording a few days earlier than normal. And that's just because I will be at DragonCon by the time most of you are actually watching this. So you're not going to get to see quite the updated list of new LitRPG audiobooks or books that have come out recently. And that's just because I'm recording a little bit. So just be aware of that. But I have some great information in LitRPG news about some great stuff that happened at DragonCon for you folks that are going to be there. So let's get right into that with LitRPG news. Okay, first little bit of LitRPG news is going to be regards to a nice book deal. The author of the Idle System series, Pagaz, has recently posted that he's actually going to be putting the first book up for free until August the 30th. So if you haven't read that series, it's actually quite entertaining and enjoyable. I believe there are also audiobooks version of that. So if you pick up the first book free, actually buying it, you might actually be able to get a discount on the audiobook version if you're interested in that. I like the unusual RPG progression system in that novel. However, it's very crunchy and wordy. I'm not sure how that came across in the audiobook because there are a lot of information about stats and idle system things. So there you go. Also in LitRPG news, we have this is kind of fun. Someone apparently was inspired by a LitRPG novel, The Fallen Bard specifically, and they wrote a song about it. And it's on YouTube. I'm not sure if we can play it, but I'll just play it if I can pop it up and see. This is why you prepare in advance, Ramon. No, here it is.
Shadows have fallen, ironless dying, brethren at war while they cry in pain.
There, I think that's all we can legally play with, without infringing on copyright. It's a free use stuff. But definitely check it out if you want to listen to the whole song. We'll have a link in the show notes to it. But I think it's always fun when other people are inspired by our genre of works, and it's always, to me, a nice milestone when that happens. Next thing you know, we're going to have television shows and movies specifically inspired by our wonderful genre of books. So I'm always happy to see this kind of stuff, and I love sharing it with you, of course. Okay, on to DragonCon stuff. The LitRPG podcast, myself, and some other people for the show will actually be at DragonCon. We'll be doing some Facebook Live stuff there, hanging out with authors, LitRPG authors, and fans, and hopefully also be recording my walkarounds, the con, so I can show you, just like I have the last couple of years, a nice maybe summary collection, like the best cosplay I saw, or just some fun things that panels I went to. Definitely also plan on going to some panels. I don't think I'll be able to live stream there just because of interference issues, but I'll definitely record them and I'll put them up when I get back from DragonCon. But also there's going to be a couple locations where I'll be hanging out with the podcast with some other LitRPG authors, so we'll talk about in a second though. You'll also be able to find some listings on your DragonCon app if you actually if you're going to be going to the convention. Just look up the author you're looking for, and if they're there as a panelist, they should show up with all their panels and stuff. But I'm going to be listing off the stuff that I found and the stuff that I've learned from other LitRPG authors just saying stuff and telling us. The first thing I want to show you is essentially a picture where there are going to be a couple LitRPG booths. And I say multiples because there are actually several publishing companies within the LitRPG community from LitRPG authors. That includes Mountain Press, which is run by Dakota Kraut and his wonderful wife. They're going to have a space here on America's Mart Building number 2. On the second floor, I'll give you the full booth names down below when I start listing things off. But there's also going to be one for Alacria Kong, and that's also going to be next to the Shadow Alley Press booth, which is run by James A. Hunter, his family and his wife, and they're all authors. So they're all right next to each other. So I actually have a map in the visual version and the video version of the podcast for people who are watching, where they are approximately on the floor, and also a larger, close-up shot where they are. So if you want to check that out, and you don't have the video version of the podcast, for one, please watch. It's fun. You get to see me do fun dances and make funny faces. But you can also go to our website at litrpgpodcast.com, the homepage. It'll be there as a news article. So if you want to check that out, of course, with also the listings of the authors and stuff. Dave Wilmarth is going to be there at the DragonCon. He's going to be doing a meet and greet in a private room at the Commerce Club on Friday the 30th from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., which is about a block south of the con at 191 Peachtree on the 49th floor. Again, it'll be Friday the 30th from 3 to 6 p.m. specifically with a hard out at 6 p.m. apparently. He'll be signing books. He won't be selling any books, but if you bring a book and you want him to sign it, he'll be happy to do so, he says. There are also going to be several other LitRPG authors who plan to apparently show up and hang out and drink and have a good time. And that's why it's a meet and greet, including myself. So if you have anything you want me to sign, shirts, books, whatever, I'm happy to do so. And again, there'll be several other authors. So I think this is one of the best places that I'm going to be live broadcasting for the podcast. So definitely check out the LitRPG Podcast Facebook page about that time. We'll see if we can get something up for everybody to watch and see and hang out and talk about. Apollo Thorn will also be at the LitRPG at the DragonCon. We don't actually have any panels for him on the list yet, but that's because he doesn't have a list himself yet. But he apparently will be on several panels, and we'll update this when we get that information from him at DragonCon. Jeffrey Falcon Lowe, author of the Slime Dungeon Chronicles, will also be at the DragonCon. He actually have a booth himself. It won't be the other groups. He'll actually be on the first floor this time of America's Mart Building number 2. He doesn't unfortunately have a specific booth number, which is weird, but I asked him and he's like, sorry dude, I can't remember it. But apparently he'll be on the first floor with a group called Terran's Lair. So look for those things and hopefully we'll be able to see him. I definitely plan to visit him when I'm there and hang out and chat and, promo and stuff, of course. So if you don't get a chance to see him, hopefully I'll be able to find him myself and tell you what booth he is at. Okay, now for the long list of authors who are panelists, which means they're going to actually be on a panel of people talking about something relating to authorship or LitRPG or something in the genre, and or having booths themselves. So Michael Chatfield is an author who's going to be a panelist at DragonCon. He actually has 4 different panels. Well, again, the specific ones in the show notes for you folks who aren't watching this. But he'll be Visions of the Future. He'll also have a panel called Fantasy Gather, another one called The World in the Game, and one called Fighting in Space. And again, they all have specific time slots and specific locations, but it's a super long list. So I'm not going to read it all off to you guys. But again, the information will be in the full show notes for the podcast. You can check it out there. Again, it's also on that one news article on the front of the LitRPGpodcast.com website. So all the information there. Luke Chimmalenko will also have a couple of panels, Heist, Roads, and Horror. Also, novel gaming, book based on games. This one actually seems LitRPG related. I plan to attend it. Dakota Kraut has a massive amount of stuff that he's doing. He has a booth with Mountain Press at, again, America's Mart Building number 2, second floor, booths number 2826 and 2727. We're going to have a map for you to reference. But at that booth, because it's related to his publishing company, he actually is going to have a whole bunch of his authors that that have published through his company there for book signings. And that includes Jay Boyce, Christopher Johns, David Pietri, Xander Boyce, Andrew Luz, and Dakota Crowd himself, of course. And there's a whole schedule there in the show notes for when different people will be there on different days from Friday, August the 30th to Monday, September the 2nd. So plenty of things there for you guys to check out and actually talk to these authors and be there. If you bring your physical copy of the books, I'm sure that they'll be happy to sign them for you if you're fans of their works. Dakota Crowd himself has a couple panels that he will be attending as well, both on Saturday, giving a book a voice, talking about audiobooks, and also Sanderson's Law of Magic. I don't think Brandon Sanderson is actually there for that panel. I think it's more along the development of a good magic system. But again, locations and times for those are actually in the show notes. James A. Hunter has a couple panels, but he also has a booth, again, at America's Mart Building number 2, second floor, booth number 2820 and 2822. He has a 2-booth section. He'll be on several panels, including Who or What Did It? Solving Crime in Urban Fantasy. Also, Finding the Groove, Music in Urban Fantasy. Then also, he's also on a panel for the Umbrella Academy, Apocalypse Suite, oddly enough. I'm not sure if he's just a super fan or if he had something to do with it. He'll also be at Fantasy Gather, which isn't a panel as much as it is a author meet and greet set up by DragonCon. Then he'll also be on a panel for Deadbeat, Dark Fantasy Detectives, and also All the Subs, which actually looks like it might be literature related or relating to like a bunch of sub-genres, like us. Aloran Kong is going to be there as well. He'll have his own booth on America's Mart Building number 2, second floor, booth number 2824. And he'll be on a ton of panels for folks who want to attend any of the things that he's interested or involved with, including the Business of Doing Business, the Heroes of High Fantasy, the Fantasy Gather, meet and greet, also Writing for Games and Steam panel, Creators panel, How to Magic It All, the LitRPG Gala, which is going to be in the sidebar bar on Sunday from 12 to 2 p.m. if you guys want to go attend there. There should be some more LitRPG authors attending there as well. Also, Sanderson's Laws of Magic, Writing in the Transmedia Age, and the Magical Realm Fantasy. So those are all of his panels. And again, we have all the actual details of times and locations in the show notes for this very podcast. Also in the full show notes and also on our news section on the front page of our LitRPG podcast .com website. So plenty of stuff for you guys to look at. And again, I look forward to hanging out with all of you folks who happen to be attending. If you happen to see me, feel free to flag me down and say hello, and we'll take pictures, videos, and we can chat about LitRPG, which is always a fun thing for me to do. Okay, on to stuff that is out now for you folks. Again, there's not a lot of stuff because this is recording extra early, but a couple stuff have come out, including Dungeons of the Gods, Legends Online book number 2. This one actually popped up earlier. It was up for pre-order for a long time. I believe it was early September, but it came out early, so here it is. Also, Bridge Quest, a GameLit adventure series, Bridge Quest book number 1. And last but not least, The Snake Report number 2. I actually enjoyed The Snake Report number 1. I think I gave it a 7 point something as a review score, and I remember actually enjoying it. So I look forward to reading these things. Okay, on to new audiobooks. Again, same situation. Not a lot between the time this is recorded and the last podcast. So I only have a couple, including Beginner's Luck, Character Development Book number 1, written by Aaron J. I enjoy this novel quite a bit. The entire series, I've done a couple other interviews with the author. It's always fun stuff, and I'm really glad he actually ended up doing an audiobook. I don't know how it sounds. You can listen to the sample for yourself, but I enjoyed the ebook version of it. That's what I can say. Also, Troll Nation, the Rogue Dungeon book number 3, out as an audiobook. Those are kind of the only things that have come out since I last recorded. On to upcoming LitRPG. I'm just going to read off a bunch of stuff that's coming out in the near future, including Endless Fantasy Online, The Phoenix Kingdom, out August 31st. Etheria, The Pioneer, an epic LitRPG adventure, out on August 31st. This one doesn't have a pre-order, but the author wrote into the podcast, shared the cover page and listing and everything. So it'll be out on August 31st, though, according to the author. On August 31st, Darkness Named, Darkness Online book number 1. I'm honestly a little iffy about this. I just started reading it. It definitely has augmented reality. I'm waiting to see if it gets actual LitRPG-ish, but we're going to give the author the benefit of that because they say it is LitRPG, and that's what we do. We trust people until the stuff comes out. So I haven't finished it, though. Like I said, only briefly started it. September the 1st, it'll be The Forest Silence, a Liberty Fantasy Adventures on Brad, book number 6. September 2nd will be The Game of Villains, World of Kark, book number 1. The second book in the LitRPG Worksheet series, Dragonheart, Iron Will be out on September the 5th. There was a snag with the pre-order, so we talked about that last week, though. September the 6th, it'll be Cliffs of Eldamar, Karzanian Online Cerulean Server, book number 2. On September the 8th, Gamer for Love, Alpha World, book number 8. The first book in a new series by Dan Serganoff is going to be out on September the 9th, called Blood of Fate, World 99, book number 1. On September the 10th, it'll be Gloominess plus 2. September the 17th, Bibliomancer, a Completionist Chronicles series, Wolfenand Warlock, book number 1. On September the 19th, Skulls of Atlantis. The third book in the Shadow Sun series will be out on September the 30th, called Shadow Sun Rebellion, according to the author. The second book in the First Song series will be out sometime in September, according to Blaze Corbin. October the 1st, it'll be Ferried, a LitRPG adventure, Monster Maces and Magic, book number 4. The second book in Hero Online series will be out on October the 3rd. The second book in the Varnoth series, The Black Blade, book number 2, will be out on October the 3rd. Dungeon Dive, a LitRPG short story, will be out on October the 16th. The second book in the Bad Guy series will be out on October the 17th. It's called The Second Story Man. On October the 17th, the Universe ICS Keymaster. That's the second book in that series. The third book in the NPC Path series, out on October 21st, called Dead Man's Retinue. On November the 1st, it'll be A Dark Path, a Grimdark LitRPG. There we go. Out on November the 1st again. November the 4th, The Way of Deception, World of Kark, book number 2. November the 7th, Avatar of Light, Interworld Network, book number 2. That's that time jumpy one. The main character has the power to reset time by a few seconds. Out on November the 9th, rather. And last but not least, November the 11th, The Last Loop, book number 1. There we go. That's it. So all kinds of stuff coming out in the near future. On to the actual reviews for new releases and reviews. And first up for the week is going to be Galactogon book number 3, called A Check for $1 Billion, written by Vasily Mahenko. It is 493 pages. It is $6.99. It is not currently on Kindle Unlimited. That might change by the time this book actually comes out, but as of this recording, it's not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. A check for $1 billion credits. The prize seems lost forever, and here it glittered again with all of its colors, drawing in the couple like a magnet, the pirates, the Eldins, and the Zathrathi. None of it mattered now. The final goal was so close, all they had to do was reach out and grasp it. Alas, fortune refuses to land in Surgeon's hand just like that, without a fight. Fortune only comes to those who can prove themselves. Will Alexis and Eunice find their inner strength and go to the end, or will the obstacles in their way force them to give up their search? After all, the most important thing is to find the planet with the prize. And yet, faced with an entire galaxy, where do they even start? So there you go. Full disclosure, I received advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. I pre-ordered this a long time ago. This is the final novel in the series, according to the author. We recently did an author interview with him not that a couple weeks ago. And he had some interesting things to say about the series, including why there was such a massive gap of time between book 1 and book 2 and book 3. But the series is apparently the last book in the series. There are hints that it might spin off into something else, but for now, this is going to be it. And I have to say, overall, despite some issues with the story and the game mechanics being super light, this is a good finish. This is a nice resolution to all the big conflicts, all the big things, again, tying it back to book 1. And I want to say that it was probably extra challenging for the author because he had issues with book 1. He wasn't really satisfied with how it turned out, which is why there was such a huge multi-year gap between book 1 and book 2 being released. But there's still a bunch of good stuff here. Space fights, tense betrayals, surprising story with twists with the main character and his pregnant wife as they search for that promised prize from book 1, and fight not only alien empires but the pirates that they're supposed to be aligned with. Overall, it's a good stuff. It's definitely a little more sci-fi than it is LitRPG here. There's just a lot less game mechanics than there was in book 1. Book 2, if you read book 2, if you listen to the audiobook version of it, you actually can tell a lot that has been curbed down, and that's just a decision by the author to do so. The game mechanics still are there. There's quests, there's rewards, that kind of stuff here. But again, it's definitely minimized. But there are other things to kind of make up for, again, like some really nice space battles. Like I said, there's some serious betrayals. I'm like, oh, I didn't see that coming at all, or wow, that's another betrayal and twist to the story. So overall, I had a good time with it. I think it's a nice conclusion. It's not my favorite in the series. It's definitely not my favorite from the author himself. But if you like this series and you've enjoyed book 2 specifically, I think you're going to enjoy book 3, and you're going to enjoy how the series kind of ends up. I think you'll probably be satisfied. I was. For me, it gets a score of 7.2 out of 10. That's a check for $1 billion. Galactogon book number 3, a LitRPG series with a score of 7.2 out of 10. And next up, we have Zones of Alacria, The Dragon Gate, epic GameLit LitRPG, the experimental Alchemist book number 1, written by K.R. Dimmick. It is 628 pages, pretty massive, at $3.99. It has a nice price point. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, and here is the author's description. In 6 days, my real body dies. Unless I solve the riddle to transition into a virtual reality, it's game over. Oriana is thrown into a deadly virtual world of magic and monsters. The power-hungry leader of the Dragon Hunters Guild offers her a choice. Sacrifice an innocent to save herself, or risk everything and become the first person ever to solve the riddle. With clues pointing to the Dragon Gate and her time disappearing fast, how can she find something that's supposed to be a myth? If she does succeed, it will undermine the foundation of the biggest guild in the game. Are you ready to play for your life? So there we go. The author does have some disclaimer saying Zones of Alacria. The Dragon Gate is the first book in the experimental Alchemist series. Game mechanics, crafting, tons of Easter eggs, pets, no harems or swearing. If you enjoy unique magic along with page-turning action adventure, then you'll love this mind-bending quest. So that's all in her novel description. Okay. Full disclosure, I received advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. The author of the story has written a few non-fiction books on how to write, but this is her first LitRPG publication. And to be honest, when I first received this novel, I was worried that this was going to be a right-to-market story by a non-giver trying to kind of make a quick buck. Thankfully, it's not. While the plot in the novel is severely forced, and that's something I'll talk about in a minute, the actual game stuff is pretty nice done. You can tell that the author's a gamer. And that's one of the things I always think at the core of writing the genre. That's the biggest key to success. If you're an actual gamer, if you understand game mechanics, if you have the experience of playing video games for a whole lifetime, it shows you in your writing. And when that doesn't exist in a story, and if it exists for an author, it's much harder to either research it away or pretend that it does. It generally usually does reflect in the story. And for me, reading the story, I can tell you that the author is definitely a gamer. She has tons of background, and the game mechanic stuff is really quite one of the enjoyable parts of the story. And I'll get to that, why specifically. But thankfully, that I was incorrect in my worries. The story itself puts the main character in a dystopian Hunger Game inspired world into a virtual reality game where she must solve a riddle in 6 days or die. Even if she does solve the riddle, her body dies and she's uploaded to the game. Once there in the game world, the main character must contend not only with figuring out the riddle she's given, but a slew of other problems that include an evil guild, mysteriously corrupted animals, and mistreated NPCs. And that's essentially what the plot of the story is. And I'm going to differentiate this in two different sections just because the plot is fairly regular. It has very predictable story turning points at like the 25% mark, the 33% mark, 50, 75, and 90% mark, which are like very common places where plot development happens, or like the story advances, or there are turns in the story. And so they're fairly regular. You know, they're nice. They are. But between those points, I should say, rather, the story is a little more slice of life. And I'd call it filler just because it doesn't have something directly to do with the plot line. And that's just the phrase I'm gonna use here, because there's nothing quite that matches that description, at least that I know of. And there in those filler sections, The main character does small quests. She goes on adventures. She crafts, and there's a lot of XP grinding. And I wanted to differentiate the two parts because I liked one of them, but I didn't like the other. And that definitely influenced how much I enjoyed the story. The plot portion of the story is the section I like the least. And that's mostly because it's predictable. I called how the story was going to develop from like the very, I don't know, as soon as she dropped into the game world. And this is something that's kind of a pet peeve for me, is that the plot points feel forced. And in many ways, the plot section of the story ignores the game mechanics and it forces the story in a particular direction to a cliffhanger ending. And it was just frustrating as all heck. And I this is always how I can kind of tell how frustrated I was with the story when I review my notes, because I take full notes on all the books I do, percentage by percentage of the story, items that happen, things that happen, my description of it, like how I read the game mechanics, my feelings, etc. And in this chart, there's more than usual other descriptions of like WTF and what the heck, and this doesn't match the game stuff, and that's always related to the plot story in this novel. However, the filler sections, the stuff between the plot that has already been described, was actually what saved the story for me. In these sections, they exist between those plot points to give the main character something to do. And I think it's these sections that the author just had the most fun with, because she could kind of just do whatever she wanted to. And let the main characters go on adventures and do quests and talk to NPCs and craft. And while it's kind of slice of life, it doesn't affect the main plot. And I think that's kind of the part that the author might have had the most fun writing, because it's just kind of fun and it's kind of just writing for fun, like seeing where the characters take you kind of stuff. It's not entirely without its own like forced plot points, but those are a lot less. Like there are definitely some places, even those slice of life sections, where it's like, oh, the main character develops a particular potion or an item that's going to be a plot related, and it doesn't make quite sense, but you kind of tell like, oh, this is going to be a plot item of plot solving at some point. But those sections are like much smaller than they are in like the regular plot areas. And I think, like I said, this is those sections that I kind of saved because they were just kind of fun. And you can see that the author is just having fun playing with these game systems and seeing where they developed. And that was, to me, the part that felt the most enjoyable and the most organically grown. Like all the stuff there in those fuller sections just developed naturally. And it showed, to me at least, as compared to the plot sections, which were always just like super forced and like, oh, it ignores the game mechanic to push the story in a certain way, or like, oh, look, there's this item that pops up that's going to change the story and give somebody some powers that's never been described in the story before. And that was always just frustrating to me, as a reader. Now, on the game mechanics. Again, the game mechanics are mostly good. The system is well thought out. When it describes the RPG system, it flows. Again, most of the sci-fi sections. You can tell the author, again, has lots of gaming experience. One of the things I liked about her mechanics was she shows her math. And like, that's always one thing that's like, oh, look, you're not trying to hide anything. You're not trying to like show, like trying to fudge your numbers or anything, because you're actually showing what the actual mechanics are. And they're shown regularly. Numbers are shown, stat pages, item descriptions, powers, all that good stuff. And again, in the filler sections, it's all followed to the letter, including a crafting system, a magic system, a pet raising system, and lots of RPG progression. There's no class system here. It's more of a free-form skill system. And again, it's only once the story goes back to those plot sections that the game mechanics seem to be ignored, or it gets a little fantasy flexible in how it describes things. So there you go. Overall, I liked the story. I liked it in spite of the plot though. And I'm not sure how to feel about it, to be honest, because I like the filler sections. I thought they were nicely done, and the character development and the backgrounds and the world building there was my favorite part, including crafting and pet raising and all that stuff. That doesn't only necessarily directly relate to the plot of the story. But every time it turned back to the storyline, the plot, the evil guild stuff or the 6 days to solve a riddle thing, I was just annoyed with those sections. So even though I was entertained overall, because again, there's more filler than there is plot sections, I kind of only enjoyed myself on a barely section. I don't think I'll read a second book in the series. I thought the first book was nice, and that's mostly because I can foresee that this style of decision of how to structure the story is probably going to be the same as book one, because the story is set up where that essentially there's an infinite number of realms that the main character can go to and kind of do the same repeated things like solving puzzles, riddles, and having conflicts with his guilds, and then filler in between. And I was entertained just enough here where it was a good review, but barely for me. And I don't know if I could do it for a second book. So for me, this gets a good score, 7.1 out of 10. I did have a good time with this, but again, I had issues with the plot. And if you don't have those issues, you'll probably like this more than I do. Like I said, some of these things are very particular to me as a reader, and some other readers definitely have the same issues, which is why I say them. But if you don't have those issues with like floor plot lines, then you're going to like this a lot more than me. And that's perfectly fine. We can all have different experiences, and we can have different, expectations and things that bug us. That's totally cool. Just as long as I try to be, I try to disclose my issues fully in the reviews, though. So for me, that's Zone of Alacria, The Dragon Gate, with a score of 7.1 out of 10, which is a good score. It's just barely a good score, with a review score of that. So there you go. And next up, we have Clear and Present Ranger, Caverns and Creatures short story written by the always hilarious Robert Bevan. This is 40 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. What do you do when you encounter a maniac in the woods who poses a danger to himself, others, and the world around him? If you're Tim, you screw off to the pub and get shit-faced. Unfortunately, the rest of the Caverns and Creatures gang are going to make him stick around until they solve a seemingly unsolvable problem. Okay, this is a funny and highly inappropriate adventure with the Caverns and Creatures crew. This time it focuses on how to help a self-hating ranger with issues with animals and plants. It definitely takes a turn I didn't expect. It's very funny. One of the things I actually really appreciate about this short story is that it actually talks about the game mechanics. And that's not always the case with these short stories. It's always the case with like the main series of the Critical Failure series that Robert Bevan writes. But some of the short stories are just so short that they kind of assume you know the main characters are trapped in this tabletop RPG world. And they don't always like bring up the game mechanics themselves. Sometimes they'll mention levels and other skills, but this is one of the few short stories where the author kind of takes this weird mechanic in I don't know if it's like 3.5 edition of D&D, but it actually crosses over into like 5th edition of the character class Rangers, and he makes a really interesting point of like how he twists it to make it interesting, and I like that about it. So although disclaimer, like there's cursing in the story, there's cursing in the novel description, which I didn't say, but there's potty humor and lots of like had sex with your mom jokes and that kind of like level of humor. So if you don't like that kind of stuff, don't read this. But if you do, like I do, probably have a good time with it and the entire series and Caverns and Creatures in general. For me, it gets a solid 7.4 out of 5. Clear and Present Ranger, Caverns and Creatures with a review score of 7.4 out of 10. Okay, next is going to be the Itemancer, book number 1, written by Forrest Minter. It is 93 pages, another short story. It is $3, and available on Kindle Unlimited. I'm like, don't read it, don't buy this, but definitely, that's a good read on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description, though. Rowan Lauren is an apprentice Itemancer, able to alter the properties of an object with a touch using a special type of energy called XP. His masters work him hard, and he is content with his lot. Everything changes when a marauding dragon attacks his sleeping hometown, and he kills it. Suddenly, he is sitting on an unbelievable pool of XP, enough to make him a god. So there you go. This is a short story that starts off with a rather well described and unique RPG progression system based on the items and gear in this fantasy world, getting experience points and up and gaining levels and powers rather than people. It's inspired by the Disgaea video game series, their game mechanics in this particular series, which alone was enough to get me to read the story. I actually, when I read that in the comment section of this novel in the description from the author, I was like, oh, I like that video game. It's actually a really fun series and it's RPG related, but it's also a different kind of RPG system, which is why I was like jazzed to see it here in this novel. I was like, oh, that was enough to definitely get me to pick it up. So the main character in the story, he kills a dragon by accident, but he gets so much experience points from his Itemancer amulet and sword that he uses he gains the ability to create his own upgrades for items. He uses this to turn his sword, his amulet, and his knife into some very pretty ladies, apparently. And the four of them essentially go on adventures, and that's the story. It's not super complicated. It doesn't take itself seriously. It's not like super serious and like, oh no, we have to defeat the evil lord or anything. It's just them goofing off, having adventures, and some light flirting. There are minor harem elements. There is no sex though. There's not even any romance. It's just mostly slice of life adventuring with severely overpowered group, and they get into trouble and they joke around, and that's kind of the highlight of it. Overall, it's a nice short read. It tries to be a different progression system. Eventually, it transforms into something more familiar. Like that uniqueness about the beginning and that system eventually fades away and it becomes a little more familiar. But that's okay. The author gave it a shot, and I appreciate that. Essentially, I enjoyed what was here. I don't think I'll read a book 2 on it, but it was still nice to see someone attempt to do a different kind of RPG progression system. And so I definitely give the author kudos for that. For me, it gets a score of 7.1 out of 10. That's going to be the Itemancer book number 1 with the score of 7.1 out of 10. Okay, folks, that's it. That's, like I said, it's a short episode. Thank you for hanging out with me today, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, Patreon, our website at LitRPGpodcast.com. Again, if you want a full written description of all those stuff from DragonCon and those places you'll see authors and their panels, go to the Liberty Podcast page, and it'll be on the news section right out on the front homepage. You can definitely check it out there. You can also hang out with me and some other Liberty authors on Facebook. We have a bunch of Facebook groups here: Liberty Books, Liberty Society, the Fantasy Nation, and Spoiled Writing Readers. We'll have links for all those places in the show notes. And until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.